The air was thick with the scent of roses and anticipation at my sister-in-law's wedding. My mother-in-law, Patricia, pulled me aside before the ceremony, her voice low and sharp. "Stay out of the family photos, Emily. We don't need your daughter messing up the frame." I swallowed hard, the sting of her words cutting deeper than I'd ever admit. But it was my 9-year-old daughter, Sophie, who changed everything. Right before the vows, she marched to the altar, her small hands clutching a phone, and said, "I think the groom needs to hear this before you say I do." And just like that, the perfect facade of the day cracked wide open. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. Patricia had made that clear from the moment I married her son Daniel 10 years ago. I was the outsider, the one who didn't fit into their polished upper-crust world. Daniel was gone now, taken by a heart attack just weeks before Sophie was born. He'd been driving home from a late shift at the hospital, his heart giving out without warning. I was left to raise Sophie alone, under the cold shadow of Patricia's resentment. She blamed me for his stress, for his death, as if I'd somehow orchestrated it by loving him. The wedding was at a sprawling vineyard in Napa Valley, the kind of place that screamed wealth and perfection. White chairs lined a manicured lawn, a string quartet played softly, and every detail was curated to look effortless, though I knew it cost a fortune. My sister-in-law, Lauren, was the bride, radiant in a gown that probably cost more than my car. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in Patricia's eyes. I'd worn a simple sage green dress, hoping to blend in, to avoid giving anyone a reason to whisper about me stealing the spotlight. Sophie, though, was impossible to ignore. She bounced out of the car in a pale yellow dress, her curly hair tied, back with a ribbon, clutching a little beaded purse like it was her most prized possession. "Mom, do I look fancy?" she asked, twirling. "You look like you belong on a throne," I told her, and her grin lit up the world. She was the best. Parts of Daniel, his warmth, his spark, his stubborn heart. I came for her, not for them. Sophie deserved to be part of this family, even if they didn't see her that way. We stood on the edge of the lawn as the photographer arranged everyone for the pre-ceremony photos. Patricia, in a tailored cream suit, her hair a perfect silver. Bob directed the scene like a general. She leaned toward the photographer, her voice a low hiss I wasn't supposed to hear. "Put Emily and her kid in the back. We don't want them ruining the aesthetic." My stomach twisted, but I didn't react. Sophie was busy chasing a ladybug, oblivious to the cruelty. I wanted to grab her and leave, to spare her this family's judgment. But I stayed quiet, like always. Keep the peace, I told myself. Don't make a scene. Sophie looked up at me, her eyes bright. "Can we get ice cream later?" she asked. "As much as you want," I said, forcing a smile. We moved to the back row, where we wouldn't ruin anything. But Sophie noticed. She always did. Those big brown eyes of hers saw everything. The way I tensed, the way I bit my lip to keep from speaking. I thought I was protecting her by staying silent, but I was wrong. She was already piecing it together, her small heart absorbing the slights I tried to shield her from. The ceremony was about to start, and the guests buzzed with excitement. Lauren floated down the aisle, her smile picture perfect. Her fiancé, Mark, stood waiting, handsome and composed. Patricia sat in the front row, her face a mask of pride. I stood near the back, holding Sophie's hand, feeling like an intruder in my own life. But Sophie wasn't content to stay invisible. She had a plan, one I didn't see coming until it was too late, or maybe just in time. The vineyard glowed under the golden afternoon sun, the kind of light that made everything look like a dream. But beneath the surface, the tension was real, coiled tight like a spring. I stood near a trellis covered in ivy, watching Sophie as she sat cross-legged on the grass, her phone in her lap. She was humming to herself, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the crowd. She wasn't just a kid at a wedding. She was a quiet observer, taking in every glance, every whisper. Patricia hadn't spoken to me since her comment to the photographer. She moved through the crowd like royalty, her smile tight and practiced. Lauren was busy posing for more photos, her laughter ringing out as she tossed her veil for the camera. Mark, the groom, was charming everyone, shaking hands and cracking jokes. To them, this was their perfect day. To me, it was a minefield. I'd spent years swallowing Patricia's barbs. When Daniel died, she'd looked at me with eyes like ice and said, "If you hadn't pushed him so hard, he'd still be here." She blamed me for his long hours, for the stress of impending fatherhood, as if I'd forced him to love us. Sophie was barely a month old when Patricia visited us in the hospital, looked at her in the crib and said, "She doesn't look like a Thompson." That was the first cut, the start of 1,000 more. Lauren wasn't cruel like her mother, but she was complicit. She'd smile at me, make small talk, but never once stood up to Patricia. It was easier for her to stay in her mother's good graces than to defend me or Sophie. We were the afterthoughts, the ones who didn't fit into their perfect family portrait. No one had invited us to the rehearsal dinner. No one had asked Sophie to be a flower girl. I only knew the wedding details because Lauren had posted them on Instagram. Sophie had been talking about the wedding for weeks, her excitement infectious. "Do you think I'll get to dance with Uncle Mark?" she'd ask, her eyes wide with hope. "Maybe," I'd say, not wanting to promise her something I couldn't deliver. She believed in the magic of the day, in the idea of family, even if that family didn't believe in her. I couldn't bear to dim that light in her eyes. As the ceremony drew closer, the photographer called for one last family photo. Patricia orchestrated it, placing Lauren and Mark in the center, her arm around her daughter like a claim. She glanced at me, then at Sophie, and whispered something to the photographer. I caught the words, "back row," and felt my chest tighten. Sophie tugged at my hand. "Can we stand by the roses?" she asked. I nodded, leading her to the edge of the group, where we wouldn't be noticed. But Sophie was noticing. She saw the way Patricia's eyes slid past us, the way Lauren's smile faltered when she looked our way. She saw me shrink, saw me bite, backwards I wanted to say. I thought I was hiding my pain, but Sophie was too smart for that. She was Daniel's daughter, after all, fearless in her own quiet way. The ceremony began, the officiant's voice carrying over the soft hum of the knee. Crowd. Sophie sat beside me, her phone tucked into her purse. I didn't know it yet, but she'd overheard something earlier that day, something that would change everything. She'd been near the bridal suite, playing with her phone, when Patricia's voice drifted out, sharp and unguarded. Sophie had pressed record, capturing words that weren't meant for her ears. And now, as the vows were about to be exchanged, she was ready to let them be heard. The vineyard was a sea of white chairs and soft murmurs as the officiant began the ceremony. Lauren stood radiant, her hands clasped in Mark's, their smiles practiced and perfect. I sat in the back with Sophie, trying to focus on the moment, to feel something other than the weight of Patricia's disdain. Sophie was quiet, her hands folded in her lap, but there was a spark in her eyes I didn't recognize, a determination that made my heart skip. I thought back to the night before, in the cramped guest room they'd stuck us in, a converted shed, at the edge of the vineyard. It was clear we were the overflow, the family they couldn't quite exclude but didn't want front and center. Sophie had climbed into her narrow bed, her yellow dress swapped for pajamas with tiny stars. "Mom," she'd said, her voice small but steady, "does Aunt Lauren like me?" The question caught me off guard, a knife to the chest. "She invited you, didn't she?" I said, brushing her curls back. "She invited you too," Sophie replied, her eyes searching mine. "But I heard things." I froze, unsure what she meant but afraid to ask. "What things?" I managed. She shrugged, her gaze dropping. "Just stuff." I didn't push her. Not then. I should have. Now, as the efficient droned on about love and commitment, I glanced at Sophie. She was watching Patricia, who sat in the front row, her posture rigid, her smile a mask. I wondered what Sophie had heard, what she'd been carrying in her small heart. I'd spent so long shielding her from the truth. Patricia's resentment, Lauren's silence, the way this family saw us as less. But kids see everything, even when you think they don't. The ceremony was nearing its peak, the moment for objections, approaching. I felt a prickle of unease, like the air before a storm. Sophie shifted beside me, her hand slipping into her purse. I didn't think much of it until she stood up, her movements deliberate, her face calm but fierce. The officiant had just said, "If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined, speak now or forever hold your peace." A hush fell over the crowd. Sophie stepped into the aisle, her phone in hand, and walked toward the altar. Heads turned, whispers rippling through the guests. Lauren's smile wavered, and Mark frowned, confused. Patricia's eyes narrowed, her hands clenching in her lap. Sophie stopped a few feet from the altar, her voice clear and steady. "Before you kiss, I think the groom should hear this." My heart stopped. I stood, my legs shaky as Sophie tapped her phone. A voice crackled. Through the small speaker, Patricia's unmistakable, sharp as a blade. "Lauren deserves better than Emily and her kid dragging us down. I told her it was a mistake to invite them. They'll ruin everything." The words hung in the air, raw and ugly. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Lauren's face went white, and Mark's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Patricia. Patricia shot to her feet, her voice a hiss. "Turn that off." She moved toward Sophie, but I was already there, stepping between them. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice low, but steady. Patricia glared at me, her face a mask of fury. "You put her up to this," she spat. I shook my head. "No. She did this herself. Because you couldn't stop hurting us." The crowd was silent, the air thick with shock. Lauren's hands trembled, her bouquet drooping. Mark looked at her, his voice quiet but firm. "Did you know she said that?" Lauren hesitated, then nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought she'd behave today," she whispered. Mark's face darkened. "So you let her treat them like this and hoped it'd go away?" He turned to Sophie, his expression softening. "Thank you," he said. Then he stepped back from Lauren, his voice steady. "I need a minute." He walked off the altar, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Lauren stood alone, her dress a stark white against the chaos. Patricia's face was a mix of rage and humiliation, her perfect day unraveling before her eyes. The vineyard felt frozen, the wisteria overhead casting shadows that seemed to hold their breath. Lauren stood at the altar, her bouquet limp in her hands, tears streaking her carefully applied makeup. Mark was gone, his footsteps fading down the aisle. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others staring in stunned silence. Patricia had retreated to a corner, flanked by her sisters, her face a mask of barely contained fury. Sophie stood beside me, her small hand slipping into mine. "Did I do something bad?" she whispered, her eyes wide with worry. I knelt down, meeting her gaze. "No, sweetheart. You told the truth. That's the bravest thing you could have done." She nodded, but I could see the questions swirling in her mind. Had she broken something? Would she be blamed? I looked at Lauren, still, standing alone, her shoulders hunched. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. She'd spent her life under Patricia's thumb, too afraid to challenge her mother's cruelty. But pity didn't erase the years of silence, the way she'd let Patricia's words poison our place in this family. I squeezed Sophie's hand and led her back to our seats, ignoring the stares from the crowd. The officiant cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess," he said, his voice shaky. Guests began to murmur, some standing to stretch, others slipping away to the bar. Patricia's voice cut through the noise, sharp and desperate, as she spoke to her sisters. "This is outrageous. That child has no right." I didn't hear the rest. I didn't need to. Sophie clutched her phone, the recording still paused on the screen. I thought back to earlier that day, when she'd overheard Patricia outside, the bridal suite. I'd seen her crouched near a hedge, her phone in her lap, but I hadn't realized what she was doing. "I didn't mean to hear it," she'd told me later, her voice small but firm. "But I thought people should know. I should have stopped her, should have told her to let it go. But I couldn't. Not when I'd spent years letting Patricia's venom slide, teaching Sophie that silence was the price of belonging. Now, as the crowd buzzed with shock, I realized something had shifted. Sophie had done what I never could. She'd refused to be invisible. She'd taken the pain I'd buried and given it a voice. I looked at her, her small frame straight and proud, and felt a mix of awe and guilt. I'd wanted to protect her, but she'd protected me. Lauren finally moved, sinking into a chair, her dress pooling around her like a deflated dream. A bridesmaid rushed to her side, whispering something I couldn't hear. Mark was nowhere to be seen, and I wondered if he'd return. Patricia's sisters were still huddled around her, their voices a low hum of damage control. The rest of the guests seemed torn between leaving and staying to see what would happen next. Sophie tugged at my hand. "Are they mad at me?" she asked. I shook my head. "They're mad at the truth," I said, "but that's not your fault." She nodded, her face thoughtful. "I just wanted them to know she's not nice." I smiled, my heart aching. "They know now, baby." As we stood there, the weight of the moment settled over me. This wasn't just about a wedding gone wrong. It was about years of quiet cruelty, of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Sophie had seen through it all, and she'd refused to let it continue. I didn't know what would happen next, whether Lauren and Mark would reconcile, whether Patricia would ever speak to us again. But I knew one thing. My daughter had more courage than I'd ever given her credit for. The vineyard was quieter now, the string quartet awkwardly packing up their instruments. Guests milled about, some heading for the parking lot, others lingering, as if waiting for the drama to resolve itself. Lauren sat slumped in her chair, her veil askew, staring at the ground. Patricia had disappeared into the bridal suite, her absence a temporary reprieve. I stood with Sophie near the edge of the lawn, her hand still in mine, her phone tucked safely in her purse. I thought back to the night before, when Sophie had shown me the recording in our cramped guest room. Her voice had been so calm, so sure. "She shouldn't talk like that," she'd said, replaying Patricia's words. "No one ever says anything." I'd sat there, stunned, as the weight of her words sank in. She was right. I'd spent years swallowing Patricia's insults, smiling through the pain, thinking I was protecting Sophie. But all I'd done was teach her that cruelty could go unanswered. Now, as the wedding unraveled, I realized how much I'd underestimated her. Sophie wasn't just a kid. She was a force, small but unstoppable. She'd seen the hurt I tried to hide and decided it wasn't okay. Her courage made me question my own silence, the way I'd let Patricia's words chip away at me over the years. A cousin I barely knew approached us, her expression soft. "That was brave," she said, glancing at Sophie. I'm sorry you had to do that. I nodded, unsure what to say. Others were less kind, shooting us sharp looks as they passed, as if we'd personally ruined their day. But Sophie didn't flinch. She stood tall, her yellow dress bright against the muted chaos. Mark reappeared, his suit jacket off, his face grim. He walked straight to Lauren, who looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. They spoke in low tones, too quiet for me to hear, but I could see the tension in their postures. He shook his head, then turned and walked away again. Lauren buried her face in her hands, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Had Sophie's actions broken something that could have been saved? But then I remembered Patricia's voice, the way she'd called Sophie a mistake. No, this wasn't our fault. Sophie tugged at my sleeve. Can we go now? She asked. I hesitated, glancing at the crowd. Part of me wanted to stay, to see how this played out, to face Patricia's inevitable wrath, but Sophie's eyes were tired, and I knew she'd done enough. Yeah, I said. Let's go. We walked to the car, the gravel crunching under our feet. Sophie held her phone close, her small face thoughtful. Are you mad at me? She asked as we reached the car. I knelt down, brushing a curl from her face. Mad? No way. I'm proud of you. You did something I should have done a long time ago. She smiled, small but real, and climbed into the back seat. As I started the engine, I glanced back at the vineyard. The chairs were still in neat rows, the flowers untouched, but the illusion of perfection was gone. Sophie had shattered it, not with malice, but with truth. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. We stopped at a roadside ice cream shop on the way home, the kind with a faded sign and picnic tables out front. Sophie ordered a double scoop of mint chip, her favorite, and sat swinging her legs as she licked the cone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and for a moment, everything felt simple. Just me and my girl. No judgment, no whispers. Do you think Aunt Lauren will be okay? Sophie asked, her voice muffled by ice cream. I sighed, leaning back against the picnic table. I don't know, sweetheart. But she's got to figure out what's right for her now. Sophie nodded, her eyes thoughtful. I didn't want to make her sad. I just wanted Grandma to stop being mean. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. You did the right thing. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better than letting lies fester. She looked at me, her face serious. You used to let her be mean to you. The words hit like a punch, but they weren't cruel. They were honest. Yeah, I said softly. I did. But I'm learning from you. That night, back at our small apartment, my phone buzzed with a call from Lauren. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying for hours. Emily, I'm so sorry, she said. I didn't know she said those things. Not like that. I stayed quiet, letting her words hang. You knew enough, I said finally. You just didn't want to see it. She didn't argue. I should have said something, she admitted. I was scared of her too. I closed my eyes, the weight of years settling in my chest. We all were, I said. But Sophie wasn't, and I'm done being afraid. Lauren was silent for a long moment. Mark's gone, she said finally. He said he can't marry into a family that hides this kind of ugliness. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Lauren's silence was heavy, and I could hear her grappling with the truth. I don't blame you, she said at last. I just wish I'd been braver. I ended the call without offering her the comfort I once would have. I didn't owe her that anymore. The next few days were quiet, but the ripples of the wedding, spread. A few relatives reached out, distant cousins, an aunt I hadn't seen in years. "We always knew Patricia was cruel," one of them texted. "Thank you for letting Sophie say what we couldn't." Their words were a small balm, but they didn't erase the years of silence. Sophie went back to school, her usual spark undimmed. She drew a picture in art class, a girl in a yellow dress holding a megaphone standing on a hill. She taped it to our fridge with the caption, "When I told the truth." I looked at it every morning, a reminder of her courage and my own failure to stand up sooner. Weeks passed, and the wedding became a story whispered among family and friends. Some called it a scandal, others a tragedy. But to me, it was a turning point. Sophie had done more than expose Patricia's cruelty. She'd shown me what it meant to stand up, to refuse to be small. I'd spent years shrinking myself to fit into this family, thinking silence was strength. But silence only gave Patricia permission to keep hurting us. One evening, as Sophie and I sat on the couch watching a movie, she turned to me. "Do you think Grandma will ever like us?" she asked. I hesitated, then shook my head. "I don't know, baby. But we don't need her to. We've got each other." She smiled, snuggling closer, and I felt a weight lift. For the first time, I believed it. Patricia never called, never apologized. I didn't expect her to. Lauren sent a few tentative texts, small gestures of reconciliation, but I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. Maybe not ever. But I was done carrying their burdens, done letting their cruelty define me or Sophie. Sophie's drawing stayed on the fridge, a daily reminder of her bravery. She'd given me back something I'd lost, my voice, my worth. She'd stood up not just for herself, but for me. For every time I'd swallowed an insult, every time I'd smiled through the pain. She'd shown me that love doesn't demand silence, that truth doesn't need permission. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever held your tongue to keep the peace or wished you'd spoken up, please give this a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's carrying their own silence. Drop a comment below. Have you ever stayed quiet when you shouldn't have, or found the courage to speak? I read every comment and want to hear your story. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories that remind us we're not alone, and hit the notification bell so you never miss one. Your voice matters, especially when it shakes.